Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
While we still have TikTok, it's fun to still get on TikTok. And yet, even TikTok is not a diversion from some of the grim realities that we deal with in our political lexicon. For example, I'm skimming through TikTok yesterday when all of a sudden I come upon this retired teacher from Florida.
The stories of Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice, just don't stop coming. Now, Clarence Thomas took another trip in 2003, again on Harlan Crow's luxury yacht, and happens to go visit Putin's hometown and Putin's palace. What the did he meet with? Who did they see? What's going on here?
Oh my God. And then yesterday on Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce articles of impeachment against Associate Justices of the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Anthony Alito, Jr.
That's right. That is Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introducing articles of impeachment. Let's let her continue.
Against Justice Thomas, the resolution includes 3 total articles. 1 count of failure to disclose financial income, gifts, reimbursements, property interest liabilities, and transactions, among other information. And 2 counts of refusal to recuse from matters concerning his spouse's legal and financial interests before the court. The second resolution includes the following impeachment articles against Justice Alito. 1 count of refusal to recuse from cases in which he had a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party before the court, and 1 count of failure to disclose financial incomes, gifts, reimbursements, property interests, among other information. Mr. Speaker, nomination and appointment to the Supreme Court is one of the highest privileges and most consequential responsibilities of our nation. Such an appointment is uniquely insulated in its power. Confirmation to the court is a lifetime appointment whereby justices are entrusted with decisions that powerfully shape the nation as well as the lives of every American.
And I would argue that we need to start considering changing that, the whole lifetime appointment thing. I mean, seriously, this is asinine. Something devised in the late 1700s, we, like the Electoral College, we cling to as if it's still brilliance. And it's not. I understand the insulation of the justices from politics, but we're not exactly seeing that. But lifetime appointment. We really need to reconsider that. And I've heard, in fact, I saw Representative Ro Khanna, I believe, last week, introducing the thought that perhaps we should cap these appointments at 18 years. I would argue 10 would be better, honestly. I mean, 10 years at least insulates the justice from being beholden to the presidential term of the person that put them on the bench, no matter, because, again, 10 years is longer than the longest presidential term could be, 8 years, right? Although, look at the Trump situation. Maybe it wouldn't, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong there. Maybe it should be 14. I don't know about 18, but it certainly shouldn't be a lifetime appointment. Anyway, back to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez yesterday.
For this reason and others, the Constitution rightfully and explicitly holds justices to even higher standards than members of Congress or even the President. Section 1 of Article 3 of the Constitution commands federal justices to hold their offices during good behavior, in addition to its clauses barring treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And Congress has exercised its power to reinforce this higher standard of the judiciary before. This body has impeached and removed 8 federal judges for transgressions ranging from evading income tax and perjury to intoxication on the bench and abandoning the office to join the Confederacy. Perhaps most critical to the legitimacy of the institution, These judicial standards require justices to recuse themselves in any proceeding where their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. In other words, if a person could reasonably believe that the legitimacy of a justice's judgment could be, or be perceived to be, compromised due to their personal involvement in the case or its parties, the standard is clear. The justice must recuse. They are required to recuse. That stringent and sacred standard exists for the good of the ruling, the judiciary, and the country. Mr. Speaker, I believe that everyday Americans, independent of party or ideology, can reasonably conclude that Justices Thomas and Alito's years-long pattern of misconduct and failure to recuse in cases bearing their clear personal and financial involvement represents an abuse of power and threat to our democracy fundamentally incompatible with continued service on our nation's highest court. For the good of the institution and the nation, absent resignation, they must be removed. The proof is undeniable, and here I will lay it out. Justice Clarence Thomas, for decades now, has carried on a close, financially entangled personal relationship with real estate billionaire Harlan Crow.
Sugar daddy.
It is of material importance to the American people to note that Justice Thomas's relationship to the billionaire only began after Thomas's powerful appointment to our nation's highest court. The cash, goods, and services Justice Thomas received over the years include large loan balance cancellations, tuition payments for family, and vacations in private jets and yachts worth up to $500,000 alone.
Don't forget Mama's house.
In total, Justice Thomas appears to have received more than $1.5 million worth in goods, cash equivalents, and services from Mr. Crow.
Wow.
And that is just what we know of. But truthfully, we won't ever really know the total sum of contributions Thomas received from Crow. Justice Thomas not only accepted these contributions while Mr. Crow had business in front of the court, but he accepted them in secret, failing for years and years to report them. Yet Thomas did report smaller gifts during this time, demonstrating a clear understanding of his legal obligation to report. Would a reasonable American question that receiving lavish gifts from Mr. Crow might lead Justice Thomas to have a bias towards his, quote, friend with business before the court? Without a doubt, yes.
Reasonable people? Oh, absolutely. Republican conservative pundits, however, no. In fact, check out my Facebook post yesterday at Ron Show ATL. I outlined how Clarence Thomas, who, by the way, used to think of his sister as something of a welfare mooch when she would, his words, wait at the mailbox for the welfare check. Yeah, that guy has judgment on those who are waiting around for the check, while he himself has been mooching off of Harlan Crow for decades. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, just yesterday, the Russian yacht story came out. That was 2003, 2 decades ago. Imagine the outrage if there were photos of Elena Kagan hanging out on George Soros' yacht. Could you, seriously, just imagine for just a second. Sean Hannity's shrill voice for months about this. Larry Ingraham continuing to rail. Like, you just know that would be the case. They know that would be the case. Back to Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
But did Justice Thomas recuse?
Nope.
No. Now take Justice Samuel Alito, who has no shortage of billionaire associates of his own.
That's right.
After billionaire Paul Singer gave Justice Alito a luxury fishing trip on a private jet, a contribution that was also hidden from the public and the court, Justice Alito not only refused to recuse, but changed his mind regarding his gracious host's case. Just a short time after accepting the lavish, undisclosed trip from Singer, Alito joined the court in reversing its previous position and took up Singer's case. He did not recuse.
Ridiculous.
Justice Alito also refused to recuse in the case itself, ultimately leading to a ruling that netted Singer $2.4 billion. And that ruling did not just enrich Singer. It also structurally tilted the playing field further away from working people and towards the vulture funds, siphoning money and resources away from the communities that need them most. Could a reasonable American question whether or not Justice Alito could have acted impartially in this case, given his personal relationship with Singer? Absolutely. In January 2021, after the former President of the United States incited an insurrection on the Capitol in this chamber to interfere with the results of the U.S. election, Justice Samuel Alito and his wife flew an upside-down American flag, a symbol of solidarity with the attack, outside their home. 2 years later, they publicly displayed outside their home yet another incendiary symbol, a flag associated with extreme right-wing Christian nationalism. Justice Alito maintains that his wife, Martha Ann Alito, is the only one responsible for the flags. But common sense maintains that such a close and incendiary revelation requires recusal by the justice from January 6 related cases.
Never mind the fact that if you're a Supreme Court justice, wouldn't you have the wherewithal to come home, see that, and go, no, you've got to take that down. How's that going to look on me? But he didn't, because he's a lifetime appointee. They're emboldened.
Despite the overwhelming appearance of a conflict of interest, Justice Alito refused to recuse himself from cases surrounding the 2020 election and questions of the former president's legal immunity in the attack. Would a reasonable person question that Justice Alito's conduct exhibits and demonstrates reasonable concern for bias in these cases? Absolutely.
Yes, reasonable people, sure. Republicans and their pundits, no, of course not, but they're not reasonable people.
And without question. And finally, Justice Thomas, who is married to Virginia Thomas, a financially and personally involved operative in the Stop the Steal movement and Capitol attack, also joined opinions in these cases, even as clear evidence mounted that not only was his wife fully committed to overthrowing the results of a fair election, but she was actively lobbying members of the Trump administration attempting to do just that. The questions before the court had unquestionable implications for Thomas's wife and consequently Thomas himself, making his refusal to recuse one of the most shocking examples of conflict of interest in the court's history. And crucially, it was both Justices Thomas and Alito who cast critical votes in the ruling. It now follows that because of Alito's and Thomas's refusals to recuse, everyday Americans cannot, should not, and will not believe that these justices, and consequently the court they serve,
That's right,
is working to uphold the Constitution and put the country ahead of their own individual self-interests.
or is even legitimate.
Americans will not believe that the court interpreted the law independent of profit for themselves and their newly termed friends.
And here's the thing, Republican. If you want to push back on the legitimacy of the Supreme Court and how the American people view it, then you would join Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in having these two removed from the bench. Because for one, you'd still have a 4-3 majority until two more are seated, and we are in a presidential election. You could always say, well, we're not going to fill those seats because we're in a presidential election. And that president was set by a fellow by the name of Mitch McConnell, right? I mean, we should constitutionally speaking, allow President Joe Biden seat replacements because, oh, wait, we also have the president of the same Senator Mitch McConnell back in 2020 when he seated someone in the heat of a, wow, oh, this is conflicting. I guess I can understand why you're not doing anything about this.
Without action against these blatant violations, reasonable Americans have and will continue to lose faith in the court itself.
Absolutely.
Reasonable Americans will and do believe that Justices Thomas and Alito are prone and subject to corruption, that the institution failing to punish them is broken, and that consequently their impeachment is a constitutional imperative and our congressional duty. The abuses of power committed by Justice Thomas and Justice Alito are precisely the types of corruption that the framers understood was an existential threat to our democracy. Instances like these and misconduct like that of Alito's and Thomas's are precisely why the framers gave us the tool of impeachment. Corruption without consequence infects all it touches. And that is why this body, Congress, has a constitutional and moral obligation to hold these justices accountable, to maintain the integrity of our courts, and to uphold the standards of the judiciary and our institutions. Lastly, we cannot ignore the most important material consequences of this court's unchecked corruption and its resulting influence, the suffering of the American people. We cannot ignore and pretend that this corruption is wholly unrelated to the millions of pregnant Americans now suffering and bleeding out in emergency rooms under the court's unleashing of extreme abortion bans across the United States, which was a key political priority of these undisclosed benefactors and shadow organizations surrounding Alito and Thomas's misconduct. Nor can we ignore the millions of Americans now suffering hours-long wait times in the hot sun, often without water, just to cast a ballot, also a direct result of this corrupt court's gutting of the Voting Rights Act, allowing the closing of polling sites across the country. You see, neither these justices nor their shadowy benefactors have to answer to the parents of developmentally delayed children about their decision to gut the power of the EPA and the entire administrative state with it. But they do have to answer to us, the Congress, whom these people, the American people, have elected and entrusted to protect them, to serve them, and to defend the well-being of our democracy. Mr. Speaker, I am here today presenting these articles of impeachment not because I am a Democrat and not because I am blind to its odds in a Republican-led chamber. I present them because it is the right thing to do. And while our framers perhaps may not have envisioned someone like me in this seat, they absolutely did envision the necessity and value of the impeachment action upon which I seek to advance today. Thank you, and I yield back.
I want to say immediately after this, Marjorie Taylor Greene stormed to the microphone and challenged AOC to an arm wrestle. I say that because if I were a political party, I would want my brand to be associated with AOC and not MTG all day, every day. The difference is astounding. You're listening to The Ron Show on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. Show notes, as always, at the end of a podcast or episode of The Ron Show at ronshowatl.com. I share them on our Facebook page at ronshowatl. That's where, by the way, I shared an article from Business Insider that spoke to Clarence Thomas and his disdain for mooches, essentially. He spoke of his sister back in 1980 in an article that Juan Williams, yes, that Juan Williams from Fox News, wrote for The Atlantic. Spoke about a month before Ronald Reagan was to be sworn in. He paid his own way to attend a conference of black conservatives in San Francisco. After Reagan sailed to victory in the election with little support from black voters, black conservatives were increasingly being discussed in the media, Williams wrote in The Atlantic. Thomas, a Reagan supporter, was not well known, but at the conference he stuck out to Williams, who at the time was an editorial writer for the Washington Post. Thomas was the most interesting of a very self-important crowd because he was so brutally candid, Williams wrote in The Atlantic, adding that Thomas explained his stance on welfare and his opposition to public assistance was in part due to his sister in Georgia. She gets mad when the mailman is late with her welfare check, Thomas said, according to Williams. That is how dependent she is. What's worse is that now her kids feel entitled to the check too. They have no motivation for doing better or getting out of that situation. That's the same Clarence Thomas who received $1.5 million in gifts, including an RV, the yacht trip, several plane trips. His mother's home purchased from him, then renovated while she got to return living in it for free. Oh, and the grandnephew's private school tuition, can't forget that. But he had shame and disdain for his sister, who relied on the check in the mail every month. Interesting, right?
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
Jake Bookman's latest column appearing at GeorgiaRecorder.com dropping this morning. Headline, If America I Love is going to fall to Trumpism, I want it to go down fighting. He writes a piece explaining why he'd like to see Kamala Harris atop the ticket this November. Writing, Donald Trump ought to be the main issue in this election. He led a conspiracy to overthrow our elected government. He incited political violence on his own behalf and then refused to intervene to stop it. And he has publicly demanded that the U.S. Constitution be, quote, terminated. His word choice, not mine, so that he, Donald Trump, could be immediately reinstated to power. Trump wants to abandon our allies to the tender mercies of Vladimir Putin and pardon those who attacked our capital. He has already sacrificed a woman's right to choose on the altar of his political ambitions and the restraints that confined him somewhat in his first term in terms of government personnel and law are being dismantled in preparation for his return. The next time, Jay Bookman writes, there will be no guardrails. Given that situation, this shouldn't be a close election, and increasingly it's not. In the wake of Joe Biden's debate performance, what ought to be a referendum on Trump, his record, and his dictatorial ambitions has become something else, and Democratic prospects have turned sour. In a tight election, little things matter and big things matter a lot. A physically compromised candidate, a candidate who has difficulty expressing himself clearly, is a big thing. My own vote is set in stone, but the people whose vote is set in stone are not the people whose eyes we should try to see through. Those who will decide the outcome of the election are those not happy with either candidate, those looking for a reason to swing one way or the other. The argument that Trump is unfit for office now has a counter-argument, that Biden is unfit for office, which clouds the outcome considerably. This situation is not the creation of the media. It is not the consequence of some conspiracy. If you witness the debate, then you know it is the consequence of Biden's own performance as candidate. When the likes of Nancy Pelosi are saying that Biden should drop out, I don't think she necessarily did, without actually saying he should drop out, okay, you know the concern is serious. The only viable option, Jay Bookman writes, is Kamala Harris. Jay Bookman joining us, columnist with the Georgia Recorder and longtime journalist. Jay, so the debate was pretty much what sealed the deal for you, it sounds like, although I think the breadcrumbs have been there for a while, even if some Democrats didn't want to discuss the breadcrumbs. How hard was it for you to even pen this piece?
It was very difficult. It reminded me of election night of 2016. I wasn't prepared to write a Trump one column, but I find myself having to do so.
Mm-hmm.
It was a moment. I remember that moment of horror, realizing what my job was at that point, and I had a similar feeling this time around.
Yeah, this obviously, I don't want to say we couldn't see it coming in 2016. It didn't really, it really did feel like a surprise that night. But this is like a slow, months-long version of that angst that we're all sort of living through, and it has a lot of the country, I would say the majority, in a malaise. You spoke of the fact that there are a number of voters who don't like either candidate. What do they call them? Double haters, right? And the double haters may outnumber either side of the flank, and that they are still up for grabs. And you believe Kamala Harris has all the upside to gain from that resource of untapped voters.
I think that's right. Biden, we know what Joe is, what he has been. We know that what he has been is not what he is now. I don't see this turning around for him. His physical and cognitive abilities, his ability to express himself, I don't see those things improving. But with Kamala, at least we have a hope of improvement in the numbers. Somebody who she's a former prosecutor. She can express herself clearly. She can advocate the case against Trump in ways that President Biden just failed to do during the debate and has shown little sign of being able to do since then.
A lot of folks are talking about the way Nancy Pelosi spoke yesterday on MSNBC about not so much what she did say, but what she didn't say. Do you pick up on that as well?
Of course. I think she was sending Biden a message, sending the Biden White House a message that she's not happy with this. Basically, she said the decision is President Biden's. He has to make his decision. He has, from his account, made his decision and announced it several times. So what she's basically telling him is, no, not that decision. We don't accept that decision. You need to make another decision.
Yeah, exactly.
As somebody said, it's like turning in your homework and the teacher says, I think you need to do this again.
Yeah. Giving you another shot at it.
Because it's not that you don't have, this is not acceptable. So
you did something I think pretty interesting, and you mentioned it on the X platform yesterday, that you actually reached out to the Secretary of State's office, the folks who handle elections in the state of Georgia, to just kind of ask, so if we show up on Election Day and it's Biden-Harris on the ticket or on the ballot, but it's actually Harris who gets, and they seem to give you the indication that that actually would work just fine, that there wouldn't be an issue.
It's no problem to change to change the ballot at this point. And if what I asked is if Harris is a nominee, is that a problem? They said no. Because technically under Georgia law, and I imagine this is true in most other states as well, under Georgia law, you're not technically voting for Joe Biden. You are voting for the Democratic electors. To the Electoral College. So those electors would be pledged to whoever the Democratic nominee is. I didn't ask specifically. I asked specifically about Harris, but I would imagine the same legal process applies to if it was anybody else as well. You're voting technically for the electors, not for Joe Biden. And so if you vote for the electors, they will vote. The Democratic electors will vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is.
And I want to think that the Biden White House or the Biden-Harris campaign or the DNC one or all three are looking into it, have their sea of attorneys who are all looking into the legal ramifications if such a switch were made, as to determine like how litigious this gets. Because as much as Republicans want to talk about showing concern for Biden's health while in office, I have to believe that they also would be primed and ready to combat the Democratic Party if they were to alter who is atop the ticket at this late hour. Don't you think? I mean, I have to think that they're primed and ready to fight this in some way, shape, form, or fashion.
Probably. First of all, I would be very surprised if anybody in the Biden-Harris campaign or the DNC is looking into this, because that would be an admission that things are about to change.
Right.
They're not going to allow that to happen. Are other Democrats looking into it? Yes. Unofficially, those kind of inquiries. Yes, I'm sure. I cannot, and we've had a recent history of trouble with the Supreme Court, but I do not imagine that they're going to bar the Democrats from changing candidates. If Joe Biden says he cannot run because he is not capable of performing the duties for the next 4 years, if he is basically saying, I am incapacitated, there's no way judges anywhere are going to keep Democrats off the ballot and basically deny the people of the United States an election, a choice. I cannot imagine that happening.
We're with Jay Bookman, journalist, columnist with the Georgia Recorder, who writes that it's time for the Democrats to pivot, for Joe Biden to say there will not be another 4 years, and that the obvious successor should be Kamala Harris. How does that work where he says, I'm not able to fulfill the duties of the job for the next 4 years, but I'm okay for the next, 9 months, 8 months? How does he do that?
I don't think that's a problem. He just says, I've been running to serve you as president for the next 4 years. I'm not confident I will be able to carry out the responsibilities of this high office for those next 4 years. So I'm choosing not to run for those next 4 years.
And how does he do that without those in his administration, including Kamala Harris, being caught up in a GOP-led House Oversight Committee inquiry into the health of Joe Biden and whatever conspiracies they want to cook up about hiding, his health woes?
Well, I think you're going to have that attempt regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing the Democrats will do one way or the other is going to change that. But I think that will become a minor. If Kamala Harris becomes the nominee, that will become a minor sideshow. That's not something that people will be concerned about.
Yeah. I try to think 2-3 steps ahead. What I know, what we've seen of the GOP and their pundits and their allies. I mean, Eric Erickson has spent the last 3 days on his radio show insisting that Joe Biden has Parkinson's. He believes it. He sees the evidence, blah, 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 blah. Never mind that none of the traits of Parkinson's are actually being exhibited by Joe Biden. He's just an 81-year-old man who has had a lifetime of stuttering. And as you get older, you sometimes lose your train of thought. That's not Parkinson's. That's just getting old. But,
Yeah, I'm not by no means qualified to make diagnosis. I was not aware that Dr. Erickson is, but he's a man of many talents, no doubt.
Yeah, he can sell you an Omaha steak in a minute or 60 seconds or less, actually.
But can he sell a Trump steak?
Yeah, no, obviously he couldn't. I don't know if you remember back when when Kathleen Blanco was running for governor, and she gave a heartfelt statement in a debate where she spoke about her deceased daughter. It really evoked a lot of emotions, and I lived in the state at that time. I knew that little moment was what sealed the deal for her. She was very much in touch with the state's voters at the time as a Democrat, a pro-life Democrat even, and managed to cruise to the governor's office. I'm wondering, is there some sort of way that Joe Biden gives a speech, addresses the American public, and we know he's an emotional guy, and we know he's been through a lot. He's lost family members. He gets choked up just thinking about his son, Beau, even, and gives the sort of speech that explains why he's not going to run for re-election again, and somehow brings some of those on the margins who have been undecided into his camp and behind a successor like Kamala Harris. Do you foresee something like that?
Oh, I think that would be a natural thing to occur. I think the natural place for it to occur would be at the convention. I think the natural thing to happen would be to have Biden place Kamala Harris's name into nomination. I think that would be a passing of the torch from generation to generation. It would be a healing gesture to the party. It would be a classy way for Biden to handle it. If this plays out that way, I would hope that you would see that.
Yeah, I've been really critical of the Democratic Party when it comes to messaging, because I think that they've really mishandled his presidency. I think they mishandled the response to all of the criticism with the Afghanistan withdrawal, inflation, et cetera, and so on. And sometimes it takes more than bumper sticker words to explain complex scenarios, and I know that hamstrings them in a lot of cases. But I really feel like this is an opportunity for Democrats to get this right. The convention is an opportunity to get it right, to lavish Biden for his decades of service, his presidency, and give him the opportunity to do exactly as we talked about, and to switch the tracks onto that younger generational change that the Democratic Party needs to be moving towards, and that I think the American people are saying they really want to see.
I think so too. But it all depends on Joe Biden. It's down to one man's decision, and he keeps making that decision. And even if you look at the statements of support from Democratic senators and politicians, they are not trying to claim that Joe Biden is perfectly fine. Their statements are along the lines of, I support Joe Biden as our nominee, and I want to see Donald Trump defeated in November.
Yeah, which I think the second half is the most important part for just about everybody who's talking.
Right, everybody agrees with that.
Right.
But you're not seeing they're not vouching for his capabilities at this point.
Yeah.
They are expressing their loyalty to the nominee and to the mission of stopping Donald Trump from returning to the White House. But most of the statements of support that you're seeing are along those lines.
So ballpark for me, if you will, what sort of percentage boost you think moving from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris might give the ticket?
I do not know. I wouldn't care to even try. I think we've seen a ongoing decline in most of the polling numbers.
Yeah.
Some of the polling numbers show a shocking decline. I'm not sure I buy all that. But this was always going to be as I think I say in the column, this was always going to be a tight race. In a tight race, small mistakes matter. In a tight race, a big mistake really matters. And we have seen that big mistake from Joe Biden. And again, I wish it weren't so, but I do not see Biden avoiding that kind of mistake in the future. We have another debate in September. We have he's going to be forced into some situations just by virtue of having to prove himself, press conferences, etc. And I just don't see a sign that he is capable of doing what he has to do to regain the confidence of the American people.
And I like the way you put it. It's about him being the candidate now that is so worrisome. He's unable to do the job of candidate. And watching that debate, I kept thinking to myself, if this were Kamala on the dais, Trump gave so many opportunities to just smack him down verbally with all the lies. And Joe was just unable to step up in any of those moments to do that. And I think Kamala Harris, who, by the way, I think eviscerated Joe Biden on the debate stage back in the 2020 race before it got shut down, would have done a much more commendable job in that realm. And I think those are the sort of opportunities that are going to move the election needle if it's going to happen.
I agree. I sat there and there were, as you say, multiple moments in which opportunities for Biden to make important, necessary points, and he failed to do so. I've seen a lot of criticism of the CNN moderators for not fact-checking on Trump's lies. That was Biden's role.
Yeah, 1,000%. I agree, 1,000%.
And he was not able to perform it. Biden had agreed to the format. He embraced the format.
Yep.
And I think with the mic, both candidates had chances to explain their point of view, and Trump He's got a perverted point of view, but he expresses it.
Yeah.
And Biden simply was not able to do that.
I mean,
that's on him. That is not on the moderator.
You're right. Taking credit for laws that Obama signed or Biden signed, Biden should have known to step in and say something about that. My last question to Jake Bookman, columnist, journalist with Georgia Recorder. If it's Kamala, who's the Veep? Do you have 2-3 names that come to mind instantly?
I think you'd go to a white male governor.
Okay.
Who's not running again now. I mean, you got there are a number of them. I don't think you're going to see people like Gavin Newsom.
Can't be Gavin. They're from the same state, right?
That's true. So is Marco Rubio with Trump, but we'll see. It's not going to be somebody like Gretchen Whitmer. It's not going to be somebody with top tier ambitions of their own for 2028.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, I keep thinking of Pete Buttigieg just because he's such a fantastic oratory when it comes on the debate to the debate stage. But I worry, and I'm a gay man. I just worry about too much of the air quote DEI stuff, coming to the forefront and just giving the right too much fodder to play with there. But
Buttigieg is very effective on the stage with a microphone on his hand.
Absolutely is.
So he definitely has a future. Whether this opportunity matches that future in his mind, I do not know.
Jay Bookman, journalist and columnist at the Georgia Recorder. Thanks for the time and joining the Ron Show this morning.
Sure, John. Thank you for the opportunity.
We'll have Jay Bookman's piece from the Georgia Recorder in the show notes at ronshowatl.com today. As I will, Stacey Abrams' op-ed, which she dropped a little less than 24 hours ago, on the other side of this Joe Biden topic. Writing, voters have been treated to a post-debate drama that is almost exclusively focused on performance versus principle. Good people stumble, liars lie. In the face of the latter, we have become myopically fascinated because for some, soothing anxiety seems easier than confronting the slow-motion death of democracy, Stacey Abrams, former Georgia House of Representative and gubernatorial candidate, writes. Let's be clear, the wishful benefits of a contested convention or a late-stage exit are vastly outweighed by the potential harm, she writes. President Joe Biden has the integrity, moral character, and record needed to beat Donald Trump in November. Our path to victory lies in standing by Biden, she writes, and understanding the high stakes of this election. The anti-Biden doom loop feels loud right now, but it is largely a phenomenon among those who obsessively follow the news or want to make the news. Most of the voters Biden has won and needs to win again already know his foibles, and they aren't turning in droves to say, I'm now voting for the bombastic fascistic liar, she writes. Former President Donald Trump has made clear his plans to be a, quote, dictator on day one, she writes, and has openly called for the termination of our Constitution, threatening the very foundation of our democracy. His return to power would deepen this threat, normalizing behavior that undermines our democratic institutions. He is a self-serving felon whose dictatorial tendencies presage a glide path to authoritarianism, Stacey Abrams writes. Trump has repeatedly fetishized the use of the military as domestic law enforcement, needed a hand-picked judiciary that shrugs off the necessity of regulatory oversight, and has legalized corruption. And he continues to celebrate the rise of repressive foreign states as emblems of power. Much of Democrats' current turmoil is the vain search for a guarantee of his defeat, one that cannot be secured short of our joined efforts. As for the narrow sliver of swing voters who are the constant preoccupation of the chattering class, she writes, they are not choosing based on age or infirmity, but on alchemy we can't control or predict. We have to make the case to these voters on the issues that matter to them. These voters have to know that a Trump presidency would bring more crackdowns on access to abortion and even contraception, and that the failed real estate maven will not tackle the housing crisis, that Trump's economic plan and promised tariffs would reignite inflation and risk a major recession. He will cost us jobs again, not create them, she writes. Going to skip a couple paragraphs because I'm running out of time. She finishes. Joe Biden's leadership over the last 3.5 years has provided stability and progress, and it is crucial that we continue to support him. Ignore the allure of the doom loop, and rather than indulge in useless worry, we must do the critical work of getting Biden reelected president. He is our guarantee for a more just and equitable future for these United States of America. That from Stacey Abrams in today's Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'll include that in Jay Bookman's column as well in the show notes at ronshowatl.com. Back tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. See you then. Have a great one.